do what you want. Gary Glitter, you couldn't walk down the street without being mobbed. He was like the Queen Mum of pop, really.
He could have run somebody over, he could have shot somebody, but nobody, the British public, won't ever forgive him for this, nor should they.
I think a child abuser will hide behind many disguises. With Gary, it happened to be his celebrity status.
Paedophilia will never be sexy, even in rock and roll. And that is the bottom line.
The story starts before the days of glam rock. In the 1950s, and a child dreaming of fame.
I remember and say, as a 13-year-old, I'm going to be a star. He is a star.
A fallen star.
He's a star.
A fallen star.
He's a star. He's a rock and roll star.
Gary Glitter was born as Paul Gadd in 1944 in Oxfordshire. The oldest of two children, he never knew his father or a stable family life. Gadd proved a difficult child. By the time he was 11 years old, he was in children's homes. He ran away continuously, a clear sign of his early unhappiness. By 1956, Gadd was living with his mum and stepfather in South London. There, the young teenager started school, very much an outsider.
He wasn't like one of the other lads. We would play sports and boxing and things. And he couldn't even go after himself at the time. He couldn't even kick a ball. He just had this aura around him. I mean, stories I can tell you about other boys wanted to punch his lights out because he's a fairy. He wasn't normal. He wasn't like us, you know.
The young Gadd did have some friends, those from local children's homes, who shared and perhaps understood his unhappiness at not belonging.
There was a Dr. Bernardo's home in Tennyson Road. He was more outgoing around them than he was in my group of friends that he grew up in.
Did he ever talk about his family and his roots?
No, I don't know anything about his family, and it was never mentioned in conversation, even when he was getting on so well round the table at this house, my house.
Did you get the impression he was adopting your family?
He was certainly looking for roots, and this love, I suppose, is a word that we could be looking for, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Alone and seemingly unloved, Gadd needed a focus. He found it in music, where he channeled all his energy. Aged 13, Gadd formed his first band.
Well, myself, I was the drummer. I had a set of hat boxes, which were set up as you'd have a drum kit. And this is where we are. We're actually in the house where we used to have our sessions a couple of times a week. The only time our band practiced, and that was in my front room. We used to come out of the front room there and up to play these gigs at the Two Eyes. Cliff Richard, Marty Wilde was around, but I mean, they weren't big stars then, they were sort of on the way.
In later life, Glitter would protest his musical origins weren't given due recognition.
This is the famous Two Eyes coffee bar, at least what's left of it, what it used to be. 1958, 59, that's where I used to sing. I mean, there's not even a plaque, you know, like they have Cliff Richard and Gary Glitter and people like that. Should have it on the wall there, don't you think?
How did Paul fit in with that crowd?
He got on very well. I mean, he was in his element. Because this is always what he wanted to do. And there's his opportunity. I mean, he was dynamite.
Gadd had finally found his home in rock and roll. He married at 19, but 1 year later he left his wife and child and went to Germany. By 1965, he had hooked up with the Boston show band, pursuing his dream of fame.
We used to play support people like Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, Bill Haley, and he always wanted to show that we were as good or better. Quite often we went down as well as the headline performer.
I mean, he was undoubtedly an excellent showman, and more than just like a showman. He gave it his whole persona, gave it 110% all the time. You know, I mean. But there again, he was in his early days. He could sing a good old tune as well. You know.
But fame wasn't instant. As the months began to roll past, Gad's desire for stardom became a burning obsession.
Sometimes you would get very upset, especially when you had a little bit to drink and you know, taking too many tablets, and he would literally burst into tears and get himself into a state thinking it's all gone, he's missed it.
Gad searched for the elusive magic formula of success through changing his own sound, image and name. Gad became Bucket, became Raven, and there were others. It's an abiding theme of his career, a willingness to be packaged and shaped in the bid for stardom, even if it meant being teased for it later in his career. By 1971, Gad had come up with yet another name. Now 27 years old, it was probably his last stab at pop fame.
We were down near Luxembourg, a place called Trier, and we got a call back from London saying, "No, I've changed my name, I've got a record out, my name's going to be Gary Glitter, come back to London and we'll get together."
Mike Leander was the man actually who created the whole glitter phenomenon, really. He wrote, produced all of Gary's stuff. He worked with loads of big names, people like the Beatles, Marianne Faithfull, Rolling Stones, lots more.
And in Paul Gad, Mike Leander found a willing and malleable subject for his vision, Gary Glitter.
The original guitar sound was recreated from I think it was a guitar found in a broom cupboard at Mayfair Sound Studios in the West End. It wasn't a particularly good guitar, it was just an old guitar, but he retuned it and did some bits and pieces on it and got that, you know, raunchy sound. Put the drums on, bass line, double tracked it a few times and harmonised it a couple of times.
Well, the whole glitter thing that Mike created was based around kind of a jungle, lots of drums, real primitive sound.
To match the sound, Leander created the perfect pop idol for the 1970s, glam and loud.
I saw, I think, 2 photographs of him before he was Glitter, and it wasn't an image that could have put him where he was going. So he had his teeth done, he had, do you call it a wig, do you call it a hairpiece? He wasn't bald, he just didn't have very substantial hair underneath it. And he had a weight problem, and he wasn't particularly tall. So he had quite a lot going against him, other than a burning desire to succeed. And yes, he was manufactured.
Gary was ready for it. He'd been primed up loads of times with sort of a touch of stardom, not quite, and so that was it, you know, his way, you know.
Gary Glitter released his first single, Rock and Roll, Parts 1 and 2. The test for the carefully created image and music had arrived.
It stormed up the charts and created an opening for that glitter music, you know, the bands were doing glam rock, but that just opened it up that bit more extrovert.
The first gig we ever did was a small village hall, and that would hold about 600 people, and about 1,500 people turned up. It was absolute chaos.
It may have been manufactured, but Gary Glitter caught the fans' imagination.
If you look at Dr. Frankenstein creating a monster, I suppose you could say that Mike Leander was the Dr. Frankenstein and Gary was a monster, really.
The timing was perfect. It was the early 1970s, glam rock was exploding, and Gary Glitter took his place as its king. The outrageous dress sense, over-the-top behaviour and unique sound was consumed by a hungry public, all singing to Glitter's tune.
One of the first Top of the Pops programmes that I managed to catch, he was on. He just appeared, and it completely knocked me out for 10. You know, it was totally like he's just landed from Mars. You know, it was unbelievable. You know, it was his over the top, larger than life. He was sort of like come and join me. You know, we'll have fun together. We'll have a great time, which I think music's all about, pop entertainment. For me, he was the prototype, if you know what I mean. His hair, right down to his big silver platform boots. He came across like he was like a comic book superhero, beckoning over, you know, with the eyes, the arched eyebrows, you know, the stare, like a rabbit in the middle of the night, you know. And he was getting away with it. It was excellent. It was fantastic.
It was a glitzy formula which led to hit after hit. Over the next 3 decades, there would be 20 million records and 11 top 10 singles, all with the same distinctive and recognisable glitter brand.
I certainly think he saw himself as pretty well top of the tree of the glam situation. When he used to go to Tramp in the evening, and if people like Pete Townsend or Bowie asked for autographs for their kids or for whoever, he was thrilled, and actually was it made him feel that he had arrived.
Gary Glitter had given Paul Gadd what he dreamed of as a child: fame. Celebrity allows access to all areas. For Glitter, it was no different. It meant a huge mass of young, adoring teenage fans and temptation.
Is that right? Is it? Right? From a fan. Is that lovely? Awfully nice. Lovely.
More than any other era, glam rock was defined by its fans. Screaming teenagers celebrating their pop idols. And in this coliseum of fame, Gary Glitter soaked up the adoration.
Well, we had an amazing fan base, and it was mostly teenagers, 14, 15-year-olds who bought our records. And if we would do the Rainbow, for instance, down in London, the place would be packed out with kids. It was quite crazy at times.
You can't see yourself as a sex symbol. I don't think anybody tries to put me out as that way. However, if somebody digs me enough to think that I am, then fine, you know.
Being a sex symbol allowed more than adoration. It also meant sex with the fans. And Gary Glitter seemed to have no inhibitions.
We were in Helsinki, and it appeared that the entire theatre had decanted to outside the hotel. And we were up on a very high floor, and looking down, there was just a swarming mass of screaming kids outside. And so Gary said, well, you know, go downstairs and get half a dozen of them and bring them up, which I did. So I grabbed 4 or 5, maybe 6 girls who were closest to the back door, and whizzed them in and took them up to the room, and he signed autographs, sat and chatted with them, and I discovered that my services were no longer required, so I left and adjourned to the bar. I think it's endemic. I wouldn't know for a fact either way whether he had sex with girls under 16 or not, in the same way now as then. 14 and 15-year-olds can look like 17 and 18-year-olds. It's not usually a question that most people ask.
And Gary probably didn't either.
No.
But even in the 1970s, sex with the fans could be a risky business.
There was a time, I think we were down in Kent. This car stopped, and it was Gary's car, and these two girls got out, and I never thought any more about it until the security guy told me that what happened later on up the road. There's a police roadblock just up the front, and some panic button had been pressed, and it turned out they were looking for an escaped prisoner who'd absconded from a local jail, and I think somebody got a bit worried that they might find Gary with two girls in the limousine or whatever, you know. So,
Glitter was living a rock and roll cliché. Along with the sex and drugs came the requisite celebrity accessory, the country mansion. It made an impression on the youngest fans he met, his 8-year-old daughter's friends.
It was only through talking the playground that we became aware that Sarah had a famous daddy, and then of course that was like an added bonus. Like, oh, she's my best friend and her dad's famous, wow. It was another world. The house was huge. It was just, I can remember the smell. The smell was just of all new, you know, as an adult now, all new units and new wood and things. It was a mansion, I think, that he'd done up. Everything was plush. There was like plush carpet, video recorder. Nobody had them in those days. And there was a room that had jars and jars of sweets. We could just help ourselves. No limits. It's just a dream come true for any child, really.
Paul Gadd was certainly living his childhood dream as Gary Glitter, but members of his backing band noticed a marked difference in him. He was beginning to believe the hype.
I can remember going into his dressing room. We used to have a little chat about the show before we went on, and I'd known him as Paul for years and years, of course. And I said, look, Paul, he said, don't ever call me Paul again. Gary's my name. And there's only the two of us in a room, and I sort of realised then he seemed to be having a kind of a personality makeover.
Everything was publicity, and everything was surrounded by minders and bodyguards or whatever, and just the aura that goes with it, I think, you know.
Right, the solo from me.
How bad did his ego get?
No.
Well, bigger than you could imagine. In effect, he was Gary Glitter, on stage, off stage, there was no let-up. I mean, it got silly. I mean, if there was a 4-star hotel, they'd put us in that. If there was a 5-star hotel, they'd put him in that. He would always be one better, you know, but that was Gary, you know, he always had to be one better. You know, if you'd have got a big car, you'd have got a bigger one still, sort of thing, you know.
There was no let-up. Glitter moved to centre stage at the expense of those around him.
He loved to be the centre of attraction, and he really couldn't help himself. So for a time there was this feeling that he wanted us to be more in the background. There was an occasion when Gary did an interview one of the music papers, and during the interview he couldn't remember anybody's name in the band. And of course then the next time I met up with the guys in the band, what's he playing at? You know, he knows damn well who we are. This ambition, this ego thing seemed to destroy most of the relationships that he had with people.
I can't really go out anymore without being bothered quite a lot. Well,
It was like a little mini Elvis Presley type scenario, you know, sort of keep him happy at all times. The show will go on if he's kept happy.
great. I love champagne for breakfast.
Behind the scenes, Glitter had become unbearable.
Like, it really is like a kind of a more expensive Andrew's liver salt, isn't it?
Some members of his backing band were starting to leave because of it. But not before noticing a downside to the Glitter bandwagon.
At times I used to feel sorry for him because he'd got almost where he wanted to be. He had all this fame, playing these venues with thousands of screaming kids. He'd made himself unpopular with the band, with the road crew, and he'd sort of end up in his hotel suite with all the luxury, everything, and he'd end up watching the telly on his own. And God knows what was going through his mind then.
It's a telling question. What lay behind the carefully created pop idol Gary Glitter? At the height of his career in the mid-1970s, nobody bothered to ask it, and there was a dark secret. It was to emerge on an Easter weekend when Glitter was holding a party at his country mansion. A friend of his daughter was to discover the real Gary Glitter. Justine Ackroyd was only 8 years old.
All the usual things were going on, you know, good food being cooked and the swimming pool being lit up at night, and it was just always fun and nice and cosy, and then in the evening me and Sarah went to bed, and then I realised it was a man in the bed with us. I wasn't sure who it was, but it was a man, and then I realised it was her dad, and by now he'd turned to me, and at first I thought he was just maybe cuddling me and lying up against me, and it didn't feel comfortable, you know. I didn't know him well enough for him to be doing that. So I lay there really still. But he was too close, and then I felt him lifting up my nightie. And then like, I felt it, and it seemed to go on for a long time. It hurt, and I was still scared of being rude, and I didn't know where to go. So bit by bit I moved nearer and nearer to the edge of the mattress. When he finally seemed to collapse and sort of not be moving anymore, I asked Sarah if she was awake, and she was. So we went through to her bathroom. It was her bathroom. It was like right next door. And we went in and we locked the door. And I felt myself down there, and I was hurting, and I didn't want to look, so I didn't. So I scrubbed. And the next morning, he gave me an Easter egg, a big fancy Easter egg, and I remember hoping that he'd forgotten about the night before, because he might think I was dirty.
On three. 1, 2, 3. Very nice.
As the 1970s drew to an end, Gary Glitter hid his terrible secret. But it wasn't the reason why fame deserted him. Instead, it was the death of glam rock. The new pop anthem was Anarchy in the UK. Punk rock was capturing the nation's imagination. Glitter's star was on the wane, and he was on the road, working a B-circuit of clubs, running out of cash.
We were actually working that week in South Wales, Fourth Corps. Gary came down, it was about 7:30 then. Gary came down the lift shaft, big fur coat, muzzled up, and surrounded by tour managers, road managers and all that, and this chap just walked up to him and just tapped him on the shoulder, and Mr. Paulgard, and hit him with an envelope on the shoulder, and that was the rip for the old the bank started the bankruptcy. And but he went on, he did a brilliant show that night.
True to character, Glitter even made light of the amount he'd lost.
This week, our castaway is the rock singer, Gary Glitter. You had this nasty bit of trouble with the income tax people for a rather large sum.
Well, I mean, it might seem a large sum, I think it was £180,000, really.
It does seem a reasonable sum, yes.
But, you know, with a couple of hit records, it's really a day's wages, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Glitter even made an event of his enforced wardrobe sale.
I lost a lot of my clothes, you know, having gone bankrupt and everything. I had to auction them off at Harrods. But we're thinking of making that a sort of an annual event in the social calendar. Because there's no point in thinking, now that's lovely. What do you think of that? That is really beautiful.
He became bankrupt in 1980, and he had an auction in Harrods. The inner revenue thought that he had to sell his beautiful suits. I couldn't believe I paid only £40 for this. This was the leader of the gang suit. It's my prized memento. I could never be apart from this now.
Celebrity and fame, the very thing Glitter had worked so hard to achieve, had slipped out of his grasp. He retreated into drugs and booze. But the showman in Glitter somehow refused to die. So after a typically flamboyant stint in the Rocky Horror Show abroad, Glitter came back to try and resurrect his crumbling career. He decided to employ the glitter formula in a circus act.
They said, would I be interested in doing circus? Because apparently they said to my manager that I was the only person that they knew that was capable of having that sort of charisma. We'll see.
We rehearsed in this great big sort of room with bales of hay and cages all round full of elephants and lions, and you know, they used to join in while we were rehearsing, and they were quite loud as well. They had a motorbike on a high wire, and Gary was on a thing hanging down below with a seat on, and the bike went right up into the air and got stuck at the top of the rope, and they were all shouting, what are we going to do, what are we going to do, you know. So I said, why don't we call the AA?
Glitter's rock and roll dreams had turned into pantomime. As he tried to rediscover public favour, a down-and-out Glitter was adopted by the Browns, a family from the West Country.
When he came to stay with us, he was bankrupt, which is why he lived with us. He had his own room. My father used to chauffeur him around so that people still thought that he had money.
I think they treated him like as a son, really, like, you know. I think he became a part of their family, I think the family that he never had.
The youngest member of the Brown household, Ellison, was in awe of Glitter. The starstruck young teenager was suddenly living with a man she had only known as a face on a poster on her bedroom wall.
She had idolised Gary for years. I went abroad to live, and when I was going on the aeroplane, she gave me a little drawing saying, I love you, love me, in matchstick men and things, because he was always her idol from a very, very early age.
By the time Ellison was 18 years old, it was no secret she was sleeping with Glitter. They moved in together, and Ellison proved a calming influence on the wild man of glam rock.
He had his little cottage down there, and he was living with Ellison. He'd become a Buddhist, a vegetarian, non-drinking, non-smoking, no drugs, running 3 miles every morning before breakfast, taking the dog for walks, and was wholly accepted within the community of that village.
A tamed Gary Glitter was ready to go back to work.
We got him a new accountant, and then we cleared up his tax affairs and we made a settlement. We got him discharged for that. We found his old catalogue and got that remarketed. And to his credit, Gary got his life together as well. Started to get into trim, and it came together.
Dusting off the image which had served him so well only a decade ago, the resurrected Gary Glitter was welcomed into the university circuit. It would prove the beginning of an extraordinary comeback. His new audience gave him an appropriate welcome.
If they liked you in those days, they used to spit and gob all over you. Oh, it was terrible. Anyway, Gary comes rolling down the steps after the clothes change, rolling down, and the stage is like completely slime, you know what I mean? And he just slides right into the audience.
We had from a business side, we never had any problems with him at all.
Gary Glitter's good business?
Good business. Got better each year. I mean, yes. Yeah, oh yeah. And became a cult. And, you know, he just went out there and camped it up, and everyone loved him.
Glitter was back. But as he attempted to ease his way into the public heart, the real Gary Glitter had never gone away. Justine Ackroyd, abused by Gary Glitter 6 years ago, was now 14. Over the years, she'd struggled to block out the memory of that night. Her next meeting with Glitter would bring it all flooding back. She was persuaded to help Glitter's daughter clean up his London flat.
He told me to sit down next to Uncle Gary, and I still had this doubt in my mind that that thing 6 years ago hadn't happened anyway. And so I sat down, you know. He said, do you remember what I did to you? And then it all just, everything caved in, because I just realised that he had remembered what he'd done. It had really happened, and he knew that it had happened. And then he asked me if I'd enjoyed it, and suggested we go through to the bathroom because there was a lock on the door. And I knew at 14 years old that I could say no, and I did. And I got up and I walked out of the room. I didn't really want to hurt my mum, and I knew it would hurt her, but I just had to tell her. I remember where we were in the house when I told her, you know, it's she was so sorry that she hadn't been there and that she didn't know before. And she just held me, and I knew she believed me from the minute I told her. And I felt like a big relief then that I had handed it over to somebody else.
Justine was so distressed, her mother went immediately to see the family doctor.
The advice was quite naive at the time, and we were advised to just get on and that she be there to support me and help me through and help me to get over it and make sure I wasn't in any vulnerable positions anymore. And so on that advice, that's what we did. I think it might be different now.
The police were not contacted, but this was the early 1980s, a decade when the silence surrounding child abuse would be broken. Glitter's dark secret wasn't out yet, but it was just a matter of time. By the early 1990s, Gary Glitter was back and could be seen playing the bigger and more lucrative stadiums. His over-the-top performances captivated a new generation of fans, unaware of his dark secret. A hit single, Rock and Roll Christmas, earned him a triumphant return to Top of the Pops.
You were meeting new fans who were latching onto him for the first time. I was really jealous because they were discovering Gary for the first time. When you discover something for the first time, it's extra special. You know, the office party. They would congregate, they all come to see Gary Glitter and all be dressed up in silver boxes. You just couldn't believe it that he's come all the way through and get his origins back again. But it was like a rock and roll pantomime, Christmas pantomime through the 90s. Oh, it was great. It was excellent.
Yeah, he seemed to just be going from strength to strength.
When you've made as many comebacks as Gary Glitter, isn't it nice to know you can always come back to the great...
He was always on programmes and adverts, you know, the jokey pop star who kept making comebacks, and everyone still seemed to love him. I remember him appearing on Jim Will Fix It. I just got this sinking feeling, and I wanted to tell Jim Will Fix It so he could fix it for me, to tell people what a monster this man was and how he'd hurt me.
How much was he making a year?
Oh, well, with us, he was pushing on. In 1990, he was hitting 400,000, 500,000 in the 90s.
Just through 2 months' work?
Yes. Everyone made money and the public were happy, you know.
But then in 1992, Glitter's private life shattered. His 12-year relationship with Alison Brown, credited with helping him make his comeback, had broken down. She went to the tabloids alleging underage sex. The revelation shocked her family.
He betrayed everyone. He let the complete family down. Someone that we welcomed, took abroad on holiday, did things too. It's just, words can't describe how the family feel about what he's done to us.
Alison's and Glitter's relationship had started when he took her to one of his performances at the Webington Hotel.
Gary took Alison up there so that she could watch the matinee performance, and whilst they were up there, he decided that he'd masturbate, so he masturbated in front of Alison, and Gary told her to keep it secret, don't tell anyone about this. In private, he liked her to wear a school uniform, to see her in it, in school tie, the pinafore dress, the hat and everything, for his own personal quirks. Alison was a virgin. She'd been to boarding school. She wasn't worldly wise. She wasn't 18, 19. She was a little girl who didn't know what was going on.
Glitter's opportunism stretched to taking Alison away for a weekend party at his friend's, who also had a young daughter.
The understanding was that she would be staying with the young girl in her bedroom. There wasn't any room there, so she ended up sleeping with Gary, and he took her virginity there.
How old was she?
14.
Glitter denied Alison's claims of underage sex, and his career seemed unaffected. But his secret was still casting its shadow over Justine Ackroyd's life. Now in her late teens, she was still caught in Glitter's web of abuse.
I went down to 5.5 stone at my worst. I don't know, I think that when someone gets anorexia, it's a sequence of events, and I certainly feel that what happened to me did bear weight on me getting anorexia, because I wanted to remain, you know, small and sort of unattractive and boy-like, I suppose, and I succeeded. For a while, you know, people were very worried and they wanted to admit me to hospital. So no, I had no boyfriends in my teenage years.
Do you put that down to?
Fear of physical contact, intimacy.
By the mid-90s, the comeback king of glam had become a very British icon. A pantomime version of Elvis Presley, maybe. A rock and roll equivalent of a saucy postcard, certainly. But crucially, Glitter had now become respectable.
Yeah. And their mums and dads
You
as
become
well.
an institution, that's what's happened. You become an institution.
Yeah.
I said you become an institution, Gary.
Oh, yes, that's right. Oh,
On chat shows, Glitter employed a confessional style to help win that respectability.
How long were you into the
Too
drunken
long,
drinks?
too long, really. During that period of time, I felt like I'd been raped or like I'd been abused, you know, and I had, of course. I'd raped myself, I'd abused myself so badly. All I wanted to do was to get in a shower and wash, and I'd clean myself. I mean, I was doing like a bottle of tequila before breakfast and a gram of Coke before lunch.
But on the other hand, look, you've come through it, and it's good to see you.
Abuse and cleansing. It's a cruel irony that Glitter portrayed himself as the victim to gain public sympathy. But it worked.
He ceased to be a threat and became a lovable darling. And the mums and dads partly remembered him from first time around, but also enjoyed the fact that he was clowning it up and going over the top with it.
Such was the public trust in Gary Glitter that he even made an appearance on the Children in Need appeal.
We're going to take you on a ride through the time tunnel to when pop songs were innocent and wholesome and had memorable lyrics like, "Do you want to touch me there? Yeah." Children in Need, salute to the king of glam rock, Mr. Gary Glitter.
Glitter's fame even bought him a ticket into the heart of the establishment.
Well, as he matured and he stabilized, he got more and more sophisticated, you know, and so socially, he was, you know, in the Belgravia, Mayfair, you know, he was very, very acceptable at dinner parties, and he was very, very well connected socially.
Became part of the establishment almost.
He did. He was very good, and he knew the game. He knew the game.
Okay, we're switching off now. Good morning.
The 18th of November, 1997, and the scandal broke. Glitter had taken his broken computer to be repaired at a high street store. There, staff discovered images of child pornography on his hard disk. Paul Gadd, aka Gary Glitter, was arrested and charged. A public examination of the real Gary Glitter started.
Today, the media descended on the sleepy Somerset village where the singer lives. The press have been camped outside the pop star's house here at Wedmore all day. But the curtains are closed and there's been no sign of the singer.
Gary's all right. He's always been very nice here to people and very friendly, you know. Show business, you always get this, don't you, wherever you go.
I think he's innocent or proven guilty.
The king of glam now faced the biggest fight of his career. This time it would be played out on a legal stage. Victory for Glitter meant keeping his place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Defeat, public revulsion.
When I first heard about the allegations against him, it was like being hit by a 40-foot juggernaut. I just couldn't believe what I was reading in front of me. I always thought, you know, they got the wrong man. Because you do, don't you? You always give the benefit of the doubt to people that you like and love.
Glitter here on stage, in what would prove his last tour, remained defiant despite the charges.
I'm proud of the way you came out tonight. I'm proud of the way you keep faith.
When I heard about the pornography, I was just really angry because it just became instantly clear to me that this had never ever stopped. It was still his thing. All these years later, he was still doing what he had always done. I felt like this is it, people will know, and maybe there is a chance that I might be believed.
At last, Glitter's terrible secret came back to haunt him. His arrest led to other charges.
Gary Glitter is charged with a string of sex offences dating back to 1975, involving a girl aged under 13 and another aged under 16. There are 5 counts of indecent assault and 4 of another serious sexual assault.
22 years after it took place, Glitter was charged with sexual offences against Justine Ackroyd when she was only 8 years old. But at the first legal hurdle, the case fell down. The magistrate's court ruled there had been too long a delay in bringing the charges to ensure a fair trial.
I was devastated because there's this protective window of time set in place by the legal system. So all the time that clock is ticking, a child abuser is getting safer and safer. And it just seems so wrong that that's the case.
But Alison Brown, Glitter's lover for 12 years, would have her day in court. Glitter pleaded not guilty to underage sex offences. At the trial it emerged Alison had done a deal with a tabloid newspaper for her story. In his summing up, the judge criticised the deal, and Glitter was found not guilty.
All she wanted was the reason why, and him to tell the truth. But throughout the court case, Gary didn't say a word. He didn't defend himself once. Nothing was said.
It looked like Glitter had won, but he still faced charges of possessing child pornography on his computer. Police had found 4,000 images, too many to have got there by accident. They included sadomasochism and buggery involving children as young as 2. In court, 54 sample charges were read out. Glitter pleaded guilty to each one.
It's just not acceptable nowadays, you know, or any day in actual fact, but you know, this current climate with so much of it around that, you know, that it's just taboo.
Glitter was led away to prison to serve his 4-month sentence. There he was stripped of all that had made him Gary Glitter, his wig, his outlandish clothing, and his status as a very British rock and roll icon. His celebrity, 4 decades in the making, was taken away.
After 40 years, I don't think I have 2 or 3 friends in the business. Oh yes, he's got none now, because he's a leper.
The king of glam rock was truly dead, and there stood the real naked Gary Glitter, a child who had dreamed of fame and become the most famous pervert in Britain.
I know what he did, and I know what he's capable of, and I'm not a frightened little girl anymore that can't tell anybody. I can tell people, and that's what I'm doing.
What is the real Gary Glitter for you?
A child abuser, a monster who hurts children, hurts little girls, in his case, little girls, and for his own gratification.